Welcome. Let me first introduce ourselves. So my name is Suzanne Mau-Asam. I'm the founder of Doors Open. I'm an L&D, learning and development expert, specialist in leadership development and also in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with me, I have my colleague Nadine.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name's Nadine Pertsch. I'm a learning and development advisor here at Doors Open and also a bit of a diversity, equity, and inclusions expert. And there's one more thing we didn't tell the group about us, I think, right, Susanna?
Yes, and that's this.
There we go.
Took some time, and that immediately says what generation I'm from. The Gen X generation, and let me also put a label on Nadine.
Yeah, because I am part of Generation Z.
So now you know the topic that we're going to talk about, and we are now giving ourselves labels. But during this session, the coming hour, you will. Let's go to something that we want to hear from you. So please, if you have your phone with you, scan the QR code and go to this Mentimeter. And you can also use the link www.menti.com and use the code 49120104 to join the Mentimeter. And there you find one question. And the question is for you to fill it in.
So I'll give everyone a second to scan the QR code and then I'll switch over to our live results of that first question. And for anybody that's not scanned the QR code yet, you will get a chance when I switch to the screen. And we already see the first responses coming in. There we go. So now we see the responses coming in. Which generation do you identify with? So we're waiting for 10 more responses. And we already see a mix in the audience. So thanks, guys, for showing us your label. Gen X, Gen Z, well represented, I see.
Millennials.
Also millennials, very present, yeah. Okay, a couple more responses. And then we see there's a mix with a bit of a majority of the generational labels present with us here today in this room. And just hold that thought as well in the back of your mind as we keep going. Because we have a second question for you before we say anything more smart, which is, where did you first discover your music? And also here we see an interesting mix. So a large representation of tapes and CDs, also a lot of people coming for vinyl and radio. So that's 50-50 almost. Tapes and CDs and vinyl and radio are fighting for first spot, I see. Really interesting. Okay.
Well, thank you for doing a little bit of labeling and boxing. This is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's move over to the other screen. Where is the? So yeah, this is what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of labeling, a little bit of putting people in boxes, what that cost you, and yeah, how you can maybe do that a little bit different. But before we jump into that, I'm sure we have all heard the story about 5 generations on the work floor.
Was at a CPD event.
Can I ask everyone to mute themselves? Thank you so much, guys.
No worries. So 5 generations present up on the work floor, and that's does mean something to how we experience work. And I'm sure that with that story, we have all heard some variations of the stereotypes that go along with that story. For example, the baby boomers, we label them as always resistant to change. And then the Gen X, overly cynical and checked out. Or you may have heard that millennials are entitled and constantly need feedback. And then, of course, our newest generation, the Gen Z, doesn't want to work. Now, that story puts the subject really on the map, but this doesn't tell the full story. So today we're going to challenge some of these assumptions and explore what is actually happening underneath all of these labels. So we just did a little bit of the Mentimeter and to see where you heard music for the first time, where you grew up with music. So, and yeah, actually, here is the thing about music, because this sometimes feels it's the clearest marker we have. Because tell me what you grew up listening to, and I can almost guess your age. Almost. Because we know, yeah, we know that every generation has its own musical milestones and its own way of discovering and experiencing music. For example, the baby boomers, they grew up with vinyl records and the radio, sitting down, listening to the entire albums, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, etc. But then we have Gen X. What did they do? They grew up in the era of cassettes, mixtapes, recording songs off the radio, carefully curating playlist for friends. Well, I at least did that. And then we have the millennials. What did they do? They burned CDs and they listened to their iPods, downloading songs from Oasis, Blur, etc. So yeah, I'm also a little bit in that generation. So, but they were the generation that listened to music for the first time, carrying the music in their pocket. Amazing. And then, of course, Gen Z, growing up with Spotify, TikTok, YouTube, discovering artists on their feed. Yeah, and actually, they listen to music by what comes up on their feed. So yeah, this, of course, sounds really convincing, and yeah, maybe this helps you to guess, okay, if you grew up like that, then this is your age. But is that exactly true? Because probably you have heard of this, but Kate Bush, an artist, of course, originally popular in the 70s. Then in 2022, she all of a sudden, her song was all of a sudden popular again because of the Netflix show Stranger Things. So yeah, here we can already see, is it then really that we can label somebody in a box? And then I have a friend. Her daughter is 15, 16. She's walking around with a Discman. And I was like, oh, I had that same one. She's listening to CDs there. So, yeah, here you can already see, is it really, yeah, are you really able to label somebody in a certain generational box? And then, of course, there is the Spotify listening age. Do you all remember? Last year, Spotify gave everyone a listening age based on when the music you play was actually made. And well, what did we see? Gen Z proudly came out as sonically Gen X. So statistics showed that most Gen Z listeners had the most artists from the Gen X time as their most played or favorite songs. Well, it's yeah, we can't really yeah, determine an age of somebody by looking at their most favorite songs. But if this is true, what then creates the most friction in your workplace? Because if we can't put people in boxes by their generation or their age, why is it then that we still have friction in the workplace because there are so many generations on the work floor? So maybe put in the chat, what is it that you experience? Is it the communication style that is different between the different generations? Is it maybe the pace of work, the use of technology? Maybe expectations, the way you give feedback. Maybe put it in the chat what you experience. And remember, we have all heard the stereotypes that go along with the stories. Gen Z doesn't want to work, boomers hate change, millennials need constant feedback, Gen X is overly cynical.
So I see expectations on working hours is one of the things that creates friction in the workplace. We've also actually got indeed communications, the use of technology, and very interesting, a clash in the view of what professionalism represents.
Okay.
Again, a bit of ways of working, work from home versus office, and another mention of the communication disconnect. And it's interesting, somebody here, Wendy, also says assumptions that different generations have about each other.
Okay, well, we will tap into that later because that is also something that we discovered. But the interesting thing is that when you look at research, so there is a research done in 2025 by HR systems company Workday. They published a report about so they researched more than 1 million employees from different companies and different countries, showing what are their values, their fears, their drivers of engagement. And this research showed that the differences inside any single generation, so inside the boomer generation, inside the Gen Z generation, those differences within a generation actually turned out to be bigger than the difference between the generations. Interesting, right? And what they discovered is that what people actually want is trust. So everyone wants to be trusted at work, to and also to have some say over how your day goes, and to do something that's meaningful, that actually matters, to be paid fairly. And everyone wants room to grow. So that is actually, so you see all these things, what people find important in their work, that is everyone at every age. So it is not linked especially to a certain generational group. No, everybody at every age, this is what they want. So the friction is real, but we say the explanation is wrong. And it's not just the explanation of generational labels that create friction. It also skips one important part about how we think as humans.
Yeah.
And you can explain that, Nadine.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So, as Susanna just explained, the research shows that within a single generation, the differences are a lot larger. And that happens because we as humans can be quite lazy beings, right? If we do something several times and it's an easy way of doing something, that becomes a behavioral pattern. And that behavioral pattern used to be successful. It used to do something that, yeah, we got success from. So our brain says that's the preferred way of doing it. Because from a survival perspective, our brain always wants to save time and energy. And if there's a shortcut that your brain can take that gets you the same result, but with less energy spent, then that's what your brain is going to go for.
Yeah, and we probably all recognize these two paths. We always look for the shortcuts.
The issue with those shortcuts in our brain is that these shortcuts can be based on box thinking, on label thinking. And having these shortcuts makes you human because every one of us has these shortcuts. And what they are called as well are unconscious biases. So unconscious biases are automatic, immediate reactions and responses in our brain based on what we've seen very often as the expected outcome. And then they can start influencing our behavior underneath our awareness. So we will react a certain way because of an unconscious bias and take a certain shortcut without even realizing it in the beginning. And the problem with that can become that the more you do this, the more you show this behavior or you follow this shortcut, the more it actually becomes your automatic response. So the shortcut becomes how you actually feel. For example, if you keep saying boomers are resistant to change or Gen Z doesn't want to work, the more you actually start believing that and acting on it as well. So the shortcuts are based on labels and they don't lead to effective behavior between the generations. They just feed into the box thinking even more. So that's something to also be aware of. The differences between generations are not as large as they are within, and your unconscious biases, your brain shortcuts, will mean that you fall into automatic, easy behavior more often.
Yeah, it's like this path, that we showed. Um, the more often you take the number two, the more, yeah, the bigger it becomes. Here it's a little sandway, but the more often you take it, it becomes a highway, and then it's easier for your brain to take that shortcut. So if we don't use labels, then what? What helps us to work together? Well, we have a framework which we call BBC, Biology, Biography, Context. And let me explain to you what this means and how you can use it, how it can help you and support you to work better together. Let me take one at a time and start with one that is sitting underneath everything else, and that is biology. So, our nervous system has one job, and that job is to keep you alive. So, that is the whole brief. Your nervous system has to keep your body breathing, your heart beating, without you having to think about it. Because you don't tell your heart to beat, right? You don't remind yourself, yeah, I need to breathe. Your nervous system does that automatically for you, 24/7, no day off. And to keep you alive, it has to keep you safe, right? So every second, um, and without you even noticing it, your nervous system is scanning the environment constantly, asking one simple question: is it safe here? Are these people around me safe? Is this environment safe? And that is what we call neuroception. And it runs whether you want it or not. You don't have to think about it. So the question that it is asking constantly is this safe? If the answer is yes, then life continues, heart is steady, you can breathe easily, your mind is open. But if the answer is no, it's not safe, even if it's a small no, then your nervous system takes action. And how does it do that? We all know probably the fight, flight, and freeze stance. So, this is an ancient biological system to ensure your survival. And it's been doing that for thousands of years. And we are not consciously aware of it, but it is what our system is doing. So when your system feels it's not safe, then it goes either into fight, flight, or freeze. It's none of these are choice, it's your biology. So, what does that look like? 200,000 years ago, your ancestors see a saber-toothed tiger And then the system fires fight, flight, or freeze. And that worked. That's how they survived. We are here basically because of that. But now the same system is still working. You're crossing a street, a car comes fast, you don't think, you jump backwards, and your nervous saved you in a split second before you could consciously think, okay, before even your mind could register, hey, there's a car, your nervous system automatically responds. So that is basically the same fight, flight, freeze system. Now, this also works when you're at work, when you're doing your job. But then it looks a little bit different. So before we continue, do you recognize it? Give a little bit of a thumbs up in the chat if you recognize that fight flight system.
Yeah. So we see a couple recognizing thumbs coming up. So we've heard of these three reactions before of our nervous system.
Okay, so how does that then actually look like in the workplace? So the first example, let's say we have a senior manager who gets sharp and defensive. The second, a younger colleague questions the process. And then what we say is we call it rigid, or they're stuck in their ways, they are maybe resistant to change. But in reality, this is what the fight response can look like. Another example, a person who goes quiet, who reads messages, starts typing, or maybe even stops typing and never replies. That is called ghosting, a term that became popular through the Gen Z dating culture. But avoiding a difficult conversation, that's also a classic flight response. And then the person who freezes in front of a new tool or platform. And we then might joke about, oh, yeah, boomers and technology. Or on the other hand, assume, let's say, a younger colleague who has checked out. So in reality, that is also a nervous system response. That is the freeze. So it's the same responses at every age. So the trigger changes, but it's the same fight, flight, freeze response. And none of these are choice, they are all biology. And maybe one thing to mention as well about biology is that when your body decides something is not safe, the thinking part of your brain, and that is this frontal part of your brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex, quietly steps back. So you cannot think clearly anymore. Your rational thinking is basically gone offline. And that is the moment when stereotypes become more tempting. Because under stress, the smart, flexible part goes offline, and the older, faster part, the fight flight response, takes the wheel. And that is the exact moment the boxes and the stereotyping become stronger. And here is the part that matters for today during this session. A brain that has to keep you safe has to be fast, right? It cannot, weigh every person from scratch. So it sorts. It drops the world into boxes. Friend, threat, like me, doesn't like me. And before you have had one single thought, your system is doing that sorting. Basically, it's a flaw in our thinking based on survival. So, and here's the important part. When we put people into generations, label them in a certain generational box, we are not being lazy or unkind. No, we are doing exactly what the brain is built to do. Biology is the reason why we think in boxes at all. So basically, generation is one more box the safety system reaches for. That's why these labels feel so natural. And it's also so hard to put them down. They're fast, they're cheap, they're easy they're cheap in energy, it's easy, and they feel safe. So yeah, remember that you do this more when you feel tired, afraid, when you feel you're not being liked, when you don't belong. Then we reach for those labels. It's biology. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So let's move over to the second element in this framework. So if biology gives us all the same body, the same nervous system, we have the same safety system and the same responses, right? The fight, flight, freeze. But then why is it that one person responds fighting, becoming angry, and the other one is going into a freeze? Why is that? That is the biography. So, biography is built, is basically is a story you have learned to believe because of the experience you had and because of your upbringing. The story you believe that keeps you safe. So, and where did you learn these stories? For example, how did you grow up? What did your family look like? Was it safe, for example, to show your emotions? Was it safe to argue or to discuss things at home? And then also your community. So that is a little bit bigger than your own family. What was it like at school? Were you able to speak up? What was the difference between boys and girls, for example? And then institutions, um, like a church, legal system, healthcare systems, they all form your shaping story. What you believe that keeps you safe. Let me make it a little bit more concrete and maybe a little bit more close to home. So, if you, for example, so most of you I heard, or a lot of you are freelancers, so you know how it feels that there is sometimes a gap between two jobs, right? Now, if you grew up watching, for example, a parent get laid off, or for example, money was tight at home, your system learns that an empty week with no work, with no job, is a threat. So what happens then? You never say no to a booking, you overcommit, you are a little bit too accommodating to a promoter because some part of you feels you need that person. And then on the other hand, someone who grew up with a safety net can say, okay, I let go of this job or this gig. Some empty weeks in the calendar. Yeah, that's okay. So what you see here is two completely different systems reading the situation and having different responses because of your shaping story, because of your biography. Here's another example some of you might recognize. Touring, yeah, touring with a band or a music group. Um, the old way of working and thinking was you don't complain. The show goes on. The show goes on. If you maybe sprain your wrist, you just yeah, you go through it because tomorrow there's another show. And if you have learned that, um, then yeah, you override the tiredness, you override the pain, you keep going. And that can look like a generational thing. I mean, we said, okay, what are the frictions in the workplace, working hours, things like that. But it's not really a generational thing because it's what you have learned in your shaping story. And yeah, for example, even within a generation, let's say two 25-year-olds, and one is trained by a stage manager who said, yeah, you need to work late, push through it, etc. And the other one was trained by someone who was actually asking, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Then they probably respond in a very different way, but they are the same generation. And then a last example, yeah, somebody I know, a friend of mine, has a brother, and these two brothers went to the same boarding school. They were 3 years apart. Well, you probably can picture what kind of place they went to. So the older brother arrived when he was 11 years old in the old regime. So that meant the dining hall doors opened at 6 for the senior boys, so they ate first. And by the time the younger ones were let in at half 6, the good food was gone. So he often went to bed hungry. And in those years, what also happened in the place that they still used physical punishment. And then 3 years later, younger brother walked into the same school. But then it had changed. No more punishment, no more physical punishments. A promise that every child got enough to eat. And what you see here, same family, same school, 3 years apart, so same generation, but two completely different nervous systems. The older brother learned that the world is a scarce place, it punishes you, so you have to stay on guard. Um, and yeah, the younger brother was more like, okay, everything is nice. He learned that there is enough, that all adults can keep you safe. So he responds totally different to the context around him. So here is the thing, your shaping story, your upbringing says much more than the generation that you were born in. And if there are any questions, let me know, huh? Okay, then the third one, context. So biography explains why two people from the same generation can react differently, right? Context explains why two completely different generations can react exactly the same. Because some of what shaped you, yeah, it was never personal at all. It was the world where you grew up inside. The society, the culture, the norms and values that live in your society, what counted as good work ethic, what is loyal, how were you meant to talk to someone older than you? Yeah, no, and the thing is here that nobody sat down and taught you that. You saw it around you, so you absorbed it, you changed, yeah, you adapted to that. Um, and yeah, we can say, okay, generations grew up in the same context, but even though um, you grew up in the same context, also culture, societal norms, etc. does do something to, yeah, how you show up. And to show you what that means, I want to show you a video that I saw last weekend on the internet. And of course, we all know the World Cup is going on. And well, let's just watch this video. We don't have sound. But what you see here is the Dutch king congratulating and celebrating with the players from Curaçao. And look at how he does that. And this is the other football team of the Dutch kingdom. And now he's walking into their dressing room. And look at the difference. How they are celebrating. So what I wanted to show here is that your culture determines how you show up. And that is what context is about. So if biography is your personal shaping story, context is the environment you all move through together. And one of the clearest examples of that is communication. Just look at what our working lives look like now, today. We have Teams, we are here now on Zoom, we have Outlook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Slack, text messages, voice notes, DMs. Every channel comes with its own unwritten rules about urgency, availability, what is professional or not, which is why, and this is important because this is why so much of the friction we blame on age or on generations is really about the different assumptions written by different contexts. Assumptions about how fast you reply, when you're allowed to be off, about what is professional. One person gets, for example, a quick WhatsApp message at 9 in the evening and thinks, oh, this is efficient, let me quickly reply. Another one gets that very same message at 9 o'clock in the evening and feels, yeah, this is intrusive. And neither of them is wrong, but their context wrote different settings about what is professional, what is normal, etc. And then there is one other thing about context. Because our context, your context, is changing very, very rapidly. Your whole industry is being handed a new context all at once. It's faster, more digital, more global, more driven by platforms than it has ever been. We all know the always on culture or hybrid teams that have a lot of channels open at the same time. I mean, we just saw the WhatsApp, the Teams, the Slack, etc. And that is not something about generations or only something for the young people. No, everybody has to face that because this is what's going on in our context. So, and the problem here is that our brains were never designed for this space, for all these things going on in your context. So what you hear is people saying, yeah, I feel depleted. I'm tired. I can't think anymore because there are so many things. Even people are calling this burnt out. And there's a name for it now. We call that brain fry. And so your brain is overloaded with all the information and the fast pace. And when your brain is fried, the nervous system, because it's also depleted, because you sleep worse, your patience is getting shorter, your connections with others get thinner. And when that happens, so when your nervous system is constantly in that alert mode, well, we talked about it, then it's easier for you to stereotype and to blame it on generations. So, if we cannot talk about labels and stereotypes anymore, yeah, then the one thing we want to tell you is we're not talking about labels and stereotypes. No, we need to become more BBC literate. Okay, then of course the question is, what can you do? Before we're gonna tell you what you can do, I want to show you this video and I hope that the sound is working. Can you check that?
I'm not sure if I can check that at the moment.
Okay,
but
let's try.
let's give it a try.
No, we don't have a sound. I will talk you through it. So this is the still face experiment that has been done a couple of years ago. And what you see here is a mother talking to her baby, and you see the baby responding to her, right? So the mother is making faces, the baby is pointing at things, the mother is responding to the baby. They're reacting to each other. The baby is smiling, is happy. And then in this research, what did the mother do? At a certain moment, she was not connecting and interacting anymore to the baby. So you see her face is going blank, is not responding. And what you see the baby doing here is trying to get her attention. Pointing again, the mother is not responding. The baby is doing everything in its effort to make the mother respond. Clapping, trying to get her attention. And when there's no connection, when the mother is not responding, the baby starts to cry. And you can look this up on YouTube. It's called the still face experiment. Yeah, you see the baby crying now. So what you see here is how our nervous systems respond to each other. So, and we all know that, huh? Because you know when you walk into a room and you feel, the energy is off here. I don't know what happened just before I walked in, but something is going on. That is your nervous system picking up the energy of other people. And that is what is constantly going on in the workplace as well. So you need to understand that when you're working together with other people, some nervous systems are in fight, some are in freeze, some are already moving forward. And so you're constantly responding to each other. It's not about age, it's not about generations, but it is about what is going on in the different nervous systems. And as you can see in the still face experiment, once the mother responded to the baby again, the baby stopped crying, etc. So nervous system respond to each other. So what is important then? That before you go into boxing, stereotyping, um, letting the frustration about a different generation grab you, it's important to regulate yourself first. Because remember, we said, okay, a nervous system that feels danger or that doesn't feel safe is going into fight, flight, freeze, right? So the frustration is real. You can feel frustrated by somebody. But what the first thing you do then is to regulate yourself. And how you can do that, let's actually do this for a second. So think of one person at work who lands wrong with you. Someone from another age group, whose way of working maybe gets under your skin, and really feel what it does to you. Maybe your breath goes up, maybe you clench your jaws, maybe you have your fist like this. Okay. Once you really feel that frustration and irritation, drop your attention in your own body for a moment. So put your feet on the floor, wiggle your toes on the floor. See if you can feel your legs, maybe your back against your chair, and start breathing from your center. And that is 2 inches below your belly button. And if you find it difficult to breathe from there, put your hand on it and start breathing from your hand. Feel your feet on the floor, unclench your jaw, breathe from your center. And now see how you feel and how you are able to respond. So the frustration and the irritation can be real, but it is your responsibility to then regulate yourself first by doing this little bit of centering and then respond. It's like pushing a pause button before you respond. The other thing you can do is meet others where they are. So it's important to read the other person. Not their age group, not their generation. No, read their nervous system. How do you do that? Probably we all feel, hey, these people show joy, they're happy. Why do we know that? They're not saying anything. No, you can see that in their bodies, right? But can you also see this? People maybe sitting forward, making a fist, clenched jaws. That tells you something about their nervous systems. And once you can see that, you can understand, okay, they respond like this because their nervous system doesn't feel safe. How can I regulate myself in order for them to feel more safe? And then the other thing you can do is to look for similarities. So, and I think this is really important for you because we have heard in the music industry, a lot of people are freelancers, right? So, for example, in the freelance life, you can have a person of 50, maybe a lighting technician or somebody of the crew, working together with a 25-year-old. And what you have both in common is that you work on a freelance contract, so you know how it feels if you're in between two jobs. And the funny thing is that you probably have more in common with each other, even though one is 50 and the other one is 25, than with somebody in your same age group that has a steady staff contract. So look for those similarities because then you don't see the differences. No, then you see what brings you together. So stop asking questions like, what does Gen Z want? How do I handle these annoying boomers? And why are millennials actually like this? No, start asking questions like, what shaped this person? What is their shaping story? What is their biography? What state are they in now? What might their nervous system be protecting against? And what are the similarities? So, one final question for you, and you can put the answer in the chat if you like. What is one assumption about another generation that you are willing to put down this week? Just one. What is one assumption about another generation you are willing to put down this week?
And this can be something that seems small, that seems simple. And if it comes to mind, then it's already there for you to put down and to start with. Something else that we often say is take it easy, but take it. So what's one small assumption that you might want to put down? No chat responses yet, but we'll keep the conversation going and round off today, I think.
Here, Gen Z are lazy. Yeah.
Nice.
Nice, thank you. So now, before we go into a little bit of Q&A and questions that you have, as the final send-off, let's look at a short video because I think it's good to remember that the person in front of you is always more than the category your brain reaches for first. So, yeah, the only thing I'm gonna say is look for techno grandmas and tap into the collective intelligence because the best teams across ages work a lot like the best playlist. different eras, sitting next to each other. They're mixed, and that is what makes it sound nice. So yeah, let's have a look at this video.
And to add the missing sound context, this is hardstyle techno on this video that is being played, and the woman is front and center at the barrier having the time of her life.
So thank you all for being here. I think this is a really important topic and very present in all workplaces. So thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, let us know. You can either send it in the chat or come on camera or microphone.
Thank you so much for that, Susanna and Nadine. That resonated with me a lot, especially just to remember to stay curious and to meet people where they are. I don't know if anyone's got any questions that you'd like to pop in the chat. Is it possible to get the recording, Michelle? Yes. So we'll have the recording up on the live talks link, which I will pop in the chat now. And that'll be up hopefully later today or a bit later this week. Does anyone have any questions?
Can I jump in, Claire? Is that all right?
Yes, thanks, John.
Firstly, thank you. Fascinating stuff. I think I've always tried to empathize with colleagues, which I think is quite central to what you were talking about there in terms of, trying to understand and meet the others where they are. So it was good to have that habit sort of confirmed as a useful one. You touched on it in the presentation. Is there anything in particular you can think of that would be useful for people who, in our industry are working in non-typical work situations? So, it's not always going to be in an office. It could be in a field. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. And as you said, we're about 80% freelancer in live music. So that's a lot of relationships that are starting and stopping. Maybe you don't see them for another year. Is there anything you think in what you've shared today that you think we could adapt to our specific sector?
Yeah, I mean, and that is maybe not specific for your sector, but what is typical for your sector is there's a lot of change. So you work at night, you work during the day, you one time you work with this colleague, then that colleague, and like you said, sometimes you don't see each other for quite some time. So there's a lot of change going on. And change, by definition, does something to your nervous system. So your nervous system constantly has to cope with these different changes. So I think in your industry, by definition, you are in a higher state of alert. So it's important to recognize that and have your daily practices to calm down your nervous system. Because as we have seen in the session, is the moment that your nervous system is on alert, it's easier to go into stereotyping and boxing and labeling people. And since there is a high chance of your nervous system being on high alert in your specific industry, I think it's good to have some resilience practices ready that help you to regulate your nervous system. Yeah,
maybe if I can add some resilience practice for your team that we here at Doors Open practices, acknowledging what is in the room. So saying out loud, this is hard, or outing the empathy so that once you are regulated, the rest of the people around you also feel like, oh, it's okay to voice this, because then it's easier to move on from it.
Yeah, so, and thank you for adding this, Nadine, because there are two things happening here. One is that we as human beings thrive by co-regulation, so regulate together. And the other thing is that what helps you regulate your nervous system is something we call name it to tame it. So when you name, hey, I'm feeling this or that, or this is stressful for me, then already the tension goes down.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Susanna. Name it to tame it. I love that. That's brilliant. That's fantastic. I'll definitely bring that forward. If there are there any last questions? Otherwise, we will wrap up today's session. If you do have any questions, please do forward them to info@livemusic.biz and we'll send them on to Susanna and Nadine. Thank you again, Susanna and Nadine. That was really insightful. Thank you so much. I hope you've all taken away some useful tips.